The silence was thicker in space. Not just the absence of sound, but the kind of quiet that settled into your bones, into the folds of thought that once held conversation and joy. Sienna Kale had been living in that silence for 1,103 days. Cell 7 to 84 was 2 meters wide and lit in cycles that simulated day and night, though the concept had long since become meaningless to her. They called her the ghost of Sylvan. No one visited. No one spoke her name aloud. No one trusted a saboteur who, according to all official reports, had orchestrated the single most costly failure of orbital defenses in 3 sectors. But the truth was more complicated than a verdict. Always was. Today, something was different. Her routines were interrupted. Breakfast came early. A guard actually made eye contact, brief, but unmistakable. Then came the voice. Inmate Sienna Kale. Stand by for reassignment protocol. She blinked slowly at the intercom, as if uncertain she'd heard right. Reassignment. 2 guards escorted her without explanation. The corridors of Sylvan Brace were sterile, rimmed in aging alloy panels that hummed with the orbital platform's decaying power supply. She hadn't walked these halls since her trial. They brought her to a debrief room with a viewport. It faced open space, thick with derelict hulls from the Battle of Kirima Drift. Once, she had served in that fleet. Once, she'd been trusted to design defense lattices that kept colonies alive. A third figure entered. Not a guard. He was younger than she expected. Tall, dark-skinned, with uneven stubble on his jaw and grease streaked across the cuffs of his standard-issue engineer's vest. His eyes scanned her like someone trying to reconcile myth with reality. "You're her?" he asked, voice unsure. "The ghost?" Sienna didn't answer. She didn't give him the dignity of confirmation. "Right," he said, nodding to himself. "I'm Darren. Flight Systems Recovery Technician. Freelance, technically. The station's been assigned a joint maintenance initiative. They need your expertise." Her silence stretched. "The shield relay around Sector 9 is failing," he continued, shifting his weight. "Ion storms are moving in. We've got less than a week before Sylvan Brace loses orbital alignment. They think you can help." "And what if I don't?" she asked at last, her voice quiet from disuse but sharp. "You stay in your box. We all die when this thing destabilizes." Sienna leaned back in her chair. Compelling. "Look, I don't care what you did or didn't do," Darren said. "You're not a legend to me. You're an engineer. And right now, you're the only one who understands this platform's original systems from the inside out." She watched him. His posture wasn't military, but he was confident. Not rehearsed. There was sincerity behind the grease and awkwardness. "I want clean tools. I want autonomy. And I want the viewport in my cell re-enabled." Darren blinked. "You had a viewport. They disabled it after the trial. Said I didn't deserve stars." He hesitated. Then nodded. "I'll see what I can do." Her fingers remembered faster than she expected. Sienna sat at a junction console in the relay spine, accessing layers of code and manual override settings buried beneath years of patches and poorly documented updates. Darren watched from the other side of the panel, occasionally handing her tools or murmuring questions. He didn't talk much, which suited her. But he smiled, sometimes. Quick and crooked. Like he didn't realize he was doing it. On the 3rd day, he brought her a thermal mug of something vaguely resembling coffee. "Not station issued," he said. "I bribed a quartermaster with 2 ration credits and a component-grade capacitor." Sienna sipped it. Grimaced. Then sipped again. "You bribed a quartermaster?" He shrugged. "I've got charm." She arched an eyebrow. "Okay, I've got leverage." By day 5, they worked without speaking unless necessary. But the silence had changed. No longer empty. More like an unspoken rhythm. A quiet understanding between two people who'd both been used, in different ways, by systems that demanded sacrifice without apology. On day 6, he found her in the spine alone, not working. "You okay?" he asked. Sienna didn't look at him. "I used to love silence," she said softly. "Now it reminds me of the moment just before things break." Darren sat beside her on the grated floor. "I read your case file," he said after a while. "Of course you did. I think you were set up." Her hands clenched. "Thinking doesn't change a verdict." "No, but it might change what comes after." She turned her head, eyes narrowed. "Why do you care?" "Because you're not a ghost to me." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a schematic overlay. "I've been running diagnostics on the sabotage logs. They don't match your programming style." Her breath caught. "Your redundancies. Your loop codes. Your fingerprint isn't in the breach protocol at all." "I know," she whispered. Darren met her gaze. "Then why didn't you say anything at the tribunal?" Sienna looked away. "Because they had my brother," she said finally. "He was on a mining vessel docked at Chorus 3. Disappeared the day before my sentencing. They made it look like an accident. But it wasn't." Darren went still. "They threatened him. I had a choice. Defend myself and risk his life, or take the fall." He looked at her differently after that. Not with pity, but something softer. Deeper. Understanding. By day 10, the shield array was partially restored. The platform stabilized, though the ion storms had started lashing the outer hull. Work shifted to remote calibration, which meant more time in the observation deck, a space she hadn't been allowed in since her detention began. "Nice view," Darren said as they entered. Sienna nodded, then walked to the viewport and pressed her palm against the cold pane. Stars glittered in the void, endless and indifferent. The debris field around Orion swirled slowly, its broken husk silently recounting histories that no one bothered to remember anymore. "I missed this," she whispered. "Yeah," Darren said. "Me too." He watched her for a long time. Then he said, "I've been offered a transfer." Her heart sank faster than she could control. "They want me on the new ring at Argus Station. Bigger project. Better pay. Congratulations." "I haven't decided yet." She turned toward him, confused. "Why?" He stepped closer. "Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm building something that matters." "You fixed the shield array," she said, deflecting. "Not just that." His eyes were intense now, voice low. "I see you, Sienna. Not the ghost. Not the saboteur. You." She took a step back, breath catching. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because it's dangerous. So is surviving. But we're still here." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself," he whispered. "Not for their sins." Her fingers curled around his. "You'll get yourself blacklisted," she warned. "I'm radioactive." "Then maybe it's time someone burned the system down." Sienna laughed, a sharp, unexpected sound. He grinned. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine more than survival. She imagined warmth. Touch. Lips meeting in shared defiance. Nights spent staring at stars without guilt. The final diagnostics were complete by day 12. The board approved her conditional pardon. Not a full exoneration, but enough. Enough to breathe again. She was assigned probationary status. Restricted access. Limited freedom. But freedom all the same. When she returned to her cell to gather her things, she found a single line etched into the metal frame of her bunk. "Stars remember." No signature. No explanation. But she knew it was from him. He was gone by the time she got to the dock. Darren Olis transferred to Argus Ring 5 standard hours ago, the dock officer said without looking up. She stared at the list of departing names. Beneath it, a message notification blinked. Encrypted. Anonymous sender. Coordinates. A time. 2 weeks. She didn't smile. Not yet. But she stood straighter as she boarded the transport to her assigned habitat module. And when she looked at the stars that night through the viewport, finally re-enabled, she saw not judgment. Only possibility. Taven Olis didn't believe in miracles. Not anymore. He believed in soil metrics, in pH drift, in hours of grafting seed stock by hand and calibrating dew collectors by the micron. He believed in the work. But he no longer believed in the idea that love, once lost, could be found again. Not since Daniel. Not since the crash. Elizur's northern hemisphere was in its bloom cycle, 2 weeks of near-permanent light, when bioluminescent flora responded to the twin suns by blooming in waves so dazzling they made most visitors weep. Tourists came for the spectacle. Taven stayed for the silence. He preferred his biodome at the edge of the Moss Basin canyons, far from the central port and its noise. Here, he tended what the old colonies had lost: nova orchids, skyvine trees, whispergrass that sang when touched by wind. He had recreated fragments of extinct ecosystems with nothing but half-corrupted DNA maps and too many sleepless nights. And sometimes, late at night, he still whispered Daniel's name as he moved through the darkened dome, touching petals and leaves like they were memories. The pod fell from the sky on a windless night. He didn't see it fall, but he heard the impact, deep and unnatural, something bone-deep that told him this does not belong here. He found it in the upper canyon grove, half buried in moss and mist. A small escape vessel, badly damaged. Civilian grade. No markings. He expected it to be empty. Most were. But when he forced the hatch open, she was inside. Breathing. She woke 2 days later, wrapped in thermal sheets and blinking at the canopy of filtered glass above her. Taven sat in the corner, stirring a pot of searoot stew, his eyes wary. "You're lucky you landed near my dome," he said. She stared at him like he was an echo from somewhere far away. "You saved me. What's your name?" She hesitated. Her lips parted, then closed. "Yaira," she said finally. "Yaira Saren." He nodded, not pressing. She tried to sit up. Winced. He crossed the room in 3 strides and steadied her with hands that were rough from tending bark and root but careful as rain. "Whatever happened out there, your body took a beating. So did my pod. You're lucky it held together long enough to fall this close to atmosphere." "Luck," she said softly, "is not something I usually have." Taven gave her space after that. Checked her vitals. Brought her water and thin broth. Returned to his flowers when she slept. But even then, he found himself listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Yaira didn't talk much in the first week. She moved through the dome like someone used to being hunted, quiet, precise, always checking exits. Her eyes, deep gray, never rested long in one place. She asked questions about the air recyclers, the soil balance, the dome's perimeter integrity. She didn't ask about communication lines. Taven pretended not to notice. Instead, he introduced her to his orchids. "These used to grow wild on the moons of Charios Prime," he said, guiding her through rows of starburst petals. "They'd open only once a year, at the exact moment both suns aligned." She knelt beside one, fingertips hovering above its delicate corona. "They're alive in a way most plants aren't. They remember light," Taven said, smiling softly. Yaira looked at him sharply, as if startled by his choice of words. "You talk like they're people. Sometimes they feel more like people than people do." Her mouth curled, not quite into a smile. "I get that. On day 13, she touched his wrist while laughing at something he said, something small and unimportant, like how he used to name his seedlings after constellations. The touch was brief. But it burned. He looked up, heart stuttering. She looked away. The dome had a high bluff overlooking the mist basin. Taven brought her there on the 14th night. They sat in silence, watching the nova blooms below open in waves, red to violet to silver, then back again. Like the planet was breathing in light. "They're like memories," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Except they don't fade." He didn't ask what memories she was thinking of. He already knew. He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. "You could stay," he said. She turned to him, eyes bright. "You don't even know what I've done. I don't need to. I know who you are now." She let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for years. Then she said the words he didn't expect. "I wasn't just in a crash." He waited. "I was running." "From what?" "From them." She didn't explain who them were. But her face said enough. When the recovery beacon activated, an automatic failsafe in her pod's AI, she froze. Taven saw it before she did. A soft green pulse on his monitor. A signal. A trace. Someone was coming. He told her quietly. Gently. "They'll find me," she said. "They always do." "Who?" "The Telovra Consortium." His blood went cold. They were one of the most powerful private networks in the inner systems: research, intelligence, exploitation. Rumors surrounded their ethics. No one knew their true reach. Or who worked for them. "I was part of their neurological mapping program," she said. "We were mapping consciousness transfers. Creating backups. Simulations. They wanted to use it for political control. Memory rewriting. Perfect loyalty. You left. I stole the prototype." Taven blinked. "You, what?" She reached into the jacket she never took off and pulled out a small node, silver, with a prism core. Faintly pulsing. "Everything they need to enslave entire populations. It's in here." "Why bring it here?" "Because I thought it would be safe. Because no one comes here. Because." She trailed off. "Because you were ready to die," he said quietly. She nodded. He exhaled slowly. Stared at the shimmering plants around them. The life he'd built from things other people thought were dead. "Then let's make sure that doesn't happen." On the 17th day, the retrieval team arrived. 2 ships. No markings. Yaira stood in the center of the dome, node in hand, shoulders straight. Taven stood beside her. "They won't let me live," she said. "Not with this." "Then we don't give them a choice." The moment they stepped into the perimeter, Taven activated the bloom field. Nova flowers responded to heat signatures. To electrical fields. To lies. The dome lit up like fire. Energy vines launched skyward. Stun pulses knocked down the first wave of approach. Taven had modified the perimeter months ago, never expecting to use it for defense. But here they were. He grabbed Yaira's hand and ran. They hid in the seed vault beneath the dome. Only one place the sensors couldn't penetrate. He was bleeding from his shoulder. She was shaking from adrenaline. "This can't last," she whispered. "They'll break through. And when they do, I have a plan." "Taven." He kissed her. Not to silence her. Just because he had to. Just because he wanted her to know he wasn't afraid of the woman she'd been. Only the future they might lose. He had one encrypted transmitter. Outdated. Analog. Buried in the subsoil like insurance. He contacted a friend. One who owed him. An old smuggler from the mining wars. You still run quiet, he asked. For you. Always. They had 23 minutes. Yaira gave him the node. Destroy it. We can't, he said. It's the proof. It's also the target. He hesitated. Then slipped it into a cryo pouch. And when the ships broke through the dome and lit it in flames, they were already gone, slipping into the mists, toward a hidden ridge where the smuggler's vessel waited. 2 weeks later, they were on a drifting research vessel orbiting a dead star. Safe. For now. Taven built her a new lab. She filled it with starlight and silence. On the first night there, she stood beside him and said, "You believed me. Always. Why? Because even nova flowers bloom again." Revya Nyren hadn't expected the experiment to work. Quantum phase stabilization had a 0.006% success rate in live tests. And even that margin was optimistic. Miralik Station, balanced like a coin on the edge of two realities, wasn't built for stability. It was built to test the impossible. Revya had joined the project for isolation, not success. The kind of isolation that insulated you from memory. From the past. From people. But the experiment worked. And in doing so, it broke everything. The moment the field initialized, time fractured. Not catastrophically. Not visibly. But subtly. A shift in the hum of the engines. A flicker in the lights that pulsed off-beat. A presence where none should have been. Revya staggered back from the control panel, heart hammering. Phase field at 84% integrity, the computer announced calmly. Her hands trembled. Then a voice, behind her. "Where am I?" She turned. He was standing by the access tunnel, barefoot, wearing a woven shirt stained with paint. Tall, quiet, angular face and slate gray eyes. Not part of her crew. Not anyone. "Who are you?" Revya demanded, fingers twitching toward the emergency recall. He blinked. "I'm Lane. Lane Asair. I think I was painting." "Painting?" "A mural. On my wall. I was, home." He looked around. "This isn't home." Revya's mouth went dry. The experiment had opened a phase slip, an overlap between this reality and another. A tiny tear in the weave. And through that tear, Lane had fallen. The first hours were confusion. Lane couldn't explain how he got there. Couldn't access station systems, or even fully process where here was. He walked slowly, like the air felt wrong against his skin. Revya monitored his vitals. Perfectly normal, for a version of humanity from a parallel timeline. A timeline not her own. When she tried to isolate the field signature that had brought him in, she hit a wall. The experiment hadn't just opened a phase. It had synchronized. Part of him was now quantum anchored to her version of space. "I can't send you back," she said quietly on the second day. Lane just nodded. "I figured." Revya had never been good at small talk. Her world was numbers, models, unspoken calculations. People were harder. Emotions too loud, too unpredictable. But Lane was, quiet. Not in the brittle, avoidant way she was. He moved through the station like he was listening to something deeper than sound. Sometimes he'd hum while he sketched on scraps of recycled notepaper. Little spirals. Swirls. Stardust. Once, she caught him drawing her. He didn't know she saw. She didn't mention it. On day 5, they drifted too close in the gravity corridor. Her hand brushed his. He stepped back quickly, muttering an apology. But her skin still tingled where they touched. "What's your world like?" she asked him one night. He was seated on the floor near the main viewport, sketching the stars. "Slower," he said. "Quieter. Fewer stations, more gardens. People listen more than they talk. And you paint? Sometimes, he paused. Mostly I just try to find the parts of life that don't hurt. She didn't answer. But when he looked up at her, something in his expression softened. And you? What do you look for? A version of the universe where the past doesn't echo. He studied her for a long moment. Does it hurt that much? She met his eyes. Yes. On the 7th day, the field destabilized. A surge in the outer rings triggered a feedback loop, threatening the station's quantum anchor. The computer initiated emergency lockdown. Doors sealed. Alarms pulsed red and low. Revia ran diagnostics, fingers flying. Lane appeared beside her. What's happening? Your anchor is fading. If it hits 0, you die. No, worse. You phase out of both realities. Unlinked. Scattered. He stared at her. Can it be fixed? I don't know. He nodded. Didn't ask again. Instead, he helped her. Revia wasn't used to help. Most of her life had been solo deployments, solo assignments, solo grief. But now there was someone beside her. Someone who didn't question her methods or panic at the chaos. Someone who watched her like she mattered. They repaired the surge node on Deck 3 manually. No drones. No assistive AI. As they moved through the dark, their shoulders brushed. Their hands steadied each other. When she slipped on the tilted flooring, he caught her. Careful, he murmured. I don't do careful, she whispered. But she didn't move away. After they rerouted power and stabilized the anchor, Revia didn't go back to her quarters. She stayed in the lounge with Lane. Watching stars. Saying nothing. The silence was no longer emptiness. It was space filled with potential. On day 9, he kissed her. Just once. Not rushed. Not intense. Just, real. Her lips parted in surprise. Her breath hitched. And then, slowly, she kissed him back. He was solid beneath her fingers. Warm. Not a phase ghost. Not a hallucination. A person. A presence. She hadn't allowed herself presence in years. Not since the day she lost Cam. Her sister. Her only tether. She had buried connection beneath theory. Beneath duty. But Lane broke through like light through fractured glass. On day 10, the field shifted again. This time, in reverse. You're fading, Revia said, voice cracking. The synchronization is unraveling. He stepped closer. How long? Hours. Maybe less. He didn't speak. Just wrapped his arms around her. She clung to him. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't be. I should've. We had 10 days. You gave me a universe in 10 days. That's not enough. It's everything. They lay curled on the observation deck, wrapped in the emergency blanket, watching the quantum lines collapse. Lane's outline began to flicker. Her hands trembled on his skin. I don't want to forget, she said. You won't. How do you know? Because I'll remember for both of us. She kissed him again. And again. And again. Until he wasn't there anymore. She woke alone. The station was silent. Stable. The field had closed. Revia sat by the viewport for hours, eyes burning. Then she rose. Walked to the console. Opened a new project log. And wrote. The Lane Protocol, temporal copresence through quantum bonding. Underneath, she drew a spiral. A memory. A reminder. Of someone who had shown her the courage to feel again. The ocean didn't mourn. It simply took what it wanted and left silence behind. Fenra Jal had lived by its edge for 7 years, watching waves roll over the graves of her past. She was a lighthouse keeper now. Part-time systems engineer. Full-time ghost. The mining city of Malin's reef stretched across metal piers and biosteel pylons, clinging to the edges of the Navarre Sea like it was afraid to let go. The sky was a constant muted gray, painted by atmospheric filters that blocked radiation but couldn't quite erase the chill. Fenra's lighthouse was an old signal tower, half-rusted, its beacon long replaced by orbital drones. She had restored it anyway. A habit. A way to keep her hands busy when her heart couldn't be. 7 years since the colony ship Phoenix went down. 7 years since the deep core quakes ripped through the lower seafloor, dragging the ship, and her wife, into darkness. No survivors. Just debris. And memories. She first saw him in the tide. Washed ashore like driftwood. Half-conscious. Wrapped in torn polymer webbing and wearing no transponder, no ID. Fenra almost didn't go down to the beach. Wreckage washed up all the time. But something in the way he was curled, clutching his ribs like he was hiding from the sea, pulled her down the slope before logic could catch up. He was breathing. Barely. It took 3 hours to stabilize him. His skin was pale from cold immersion, muscles in early-stage shock. She warmed him slowly, hydrating his blood volume manually while running scans through her patched-together med suite. When his eyes opened, they were green. Not just green, her green. The color she used to tease had stolen her heart before his voice ever did. "You're okay," she said softly. He blinked. Lips dry. "Where?" "Malin's Reef," she said. "You washed up." "No tag. No records." His eyes flickered. "Do you remember your name?" He hesitated. Then shook his head. "Nothing. Not even a whisper." He spoke little for the first 2 days. She fed him broth and repaired the worst of his injuries. Watched him sleep. Watched him wake without recognition. He was too thin. Sunken-cheeked. Clearly dehydrated for weeks before whatever happened out there. But his hands were calloused in familiar ways. His gait matched rhythms she couldn't forget. And on the 3rd night, when he stood by the lighthouse lens and looked out over the sea with a quiet sigh, she knew. She knew without logic or reason. This was Nico. Her wife. Returned to her in the wrong body. Or maybe, right body. But wrong time. They hadn't called her wife legally. The colonies still didn't recognize partnerships without joint offspring or shared legal holdings. But Fenra never cared for bureaucratic classifications. They had loved each other in the quiet language of routine. Shared coffee, shared storms, shared laughter that echoed in the bunkroom like music. And when the Phoenix had sunk, Fenra had died with her. Except now. Nico stood in her lighthouse again. No memories. No certainties. But he moved like her. Thought like her. Responded to music in the same offbeat sway. The way he rested his hand against the rusted window frame. It was hers. It couldn't be coincidence. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" he asked one night, staring at the ocean. Fenra leaned against the threshold. "Like what?" "Like I used to mean something." She exhaled. Long and soft. Then crossed to him. Held out her hand. He took it. Warm. Steady. "Because maybe you did," she said. They fell into rhythm. She taught him how to check the beacon alignments. He taught her how to gut and repair old wave turbines faster than she ever could. Their bodies moved around each other with a wordless choreography that startled her. Every day, pieces came back. Not facts. But instincts. Flashes of motion. Reactions to taste. A memory of cinnamon. A sense of dread around electrical storms. There's something in me that knows you, he said one night. Even if my head doesn't. She nodded. There's something in me that never stopped. She kissed him on the 15th night. Slow. Unsure. A question written in lips instead of language. He answered with his mouth, his hands, the sound he made when her fingers brushed his jaw, exactly the way Nico used to. After, as they lay curled together beneath fraying solar blankets, he whispered. If I'm not who you lost. You are. But what if I'm not? Then I'm in love with a stranger who makes my soul ache in the same shape. He pulled her closer. And didn't speak again. But peace never stays. Not in places like this. 3 days later, the suboceanic surveyors returned from a deep scan run. They brought footage. Wreckage from the Phoenix. And a preserved body, found in a vacuum pod beneath the hull. Female. Unmistakably, Nico Jal. Fenra watched the scan replay over and over. The face. The DNA. The dental matches. This was her wife. Then who was the man sleeping in her lighthouse? She confronted him the next night. He sat at the table, eating bread she'd baked from algae flour. His hands still bore the cuts from turbine work. His eyes were the same green. But she looked at him like she didn't know him. I saw her, she said. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. Then you know. Know what? He set the bread down. Rubbed his face with shaking fingers. I was on Phoenix too, he said. I was a systems crawler. My pod sealed just after the explosion. But, something changed. Before I blacked out, I remember hearing her voice. Fenra swallowed. Nico? Yes. But not just hearing. Feeling. Like someone poured themselves into me. He met her eyes. I don't know who I am anymore. They spent the next week in silence. Still together. Still sharing tasks. But not speaking of what hung between them. And yet, each night, she reached for him. And each night, he came willingly. When the storm finally hit, it was the worst in 20 years. Offshore turbines failed. Flood barriers cracked. The city shut down all external systems. Fenra and Nico sealed the lighthouse. Brought up reserves. Prepared for 3 days of wind and hell. But the storm wasn't just outside. It was in her. Do you remember loving me? She asked over canned soup. He stared into his bowl. I remember the feeling of needing to see your face every morning. But not my name. Not yet. Then how do I know this is real? He set the spoon down. Stood. Crossed the room to kneel beside her. Because every time you touch me, I remember a little more. His voice broke. And when you said you loved me, something inside me said, finally. When the storm passed, the world was cleaner. Washed. Scarred. Beautiful again. Nico stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out over the water. I want to stay, he said. Fenra joined him. You already did. He turned to her. And smiled.